Yeah, I'll get into it more when I start in 60 seconds. So I guess I've started. But yeah, this isn't really like a intro to virtualization or anything. This is more kind of, I assume you at least understand the concept and maybe you've used it a little bit. Actually, yeah, I might as well just start. Virtualization for Fedora packagers and developers. My name is Paul Robinson. Focus over there. Alright, so meta stuff. Who am I? I'm going to go over who am I, who this talk is for, and what this talk is about. Yeah, if most people know me, they probably know me as the VertManager guy. I'm the primary author of VertManager. I've done a lot of libvirt work as well. Yeah, come on in. I've done a lot of libvirt work, upstream libvirt work as well. I'm a Red Hat employee. I've worked on the team when it was the Zen team, Virt team, etc. I've been at Red Hat for about 8 years. Nowadays, a lot of my time is spent just being the Fedora guy for the Virt team. So I maintain QEMU, libvirt, VertManager, a bunch of other peripherally related packages. So if you've ever filed a Virt bug in Fedora in the past few years and you got a response, it's probably for me. And I run the test days, shepherd features and changes through, and I'm just kind of general point of contact for Fedora Virt. So if you guys ever have Virt problems in Fedora, using the packages that are in there, not VirtualBox, feel free to hit me up. So who this talk is for? Basically people like me. So if you're a Fedora packager, if you're pushing updates to Fedora, if you're fielding bug reports, that's something I do, it's something I know a lot of people here do. If you're a tester, if you're an explicit QA person, or you're someone that is you want to test a bug fix, you file bugs, participate in test days, anything in some capacity. Or if you're an upstream developer that uses Fedora. This talk is all going to be specifically focused on, because like I said, I'm one of each of these things. I develop upstream code on Fedora, I've been a packager for a long time, I'm a tester QA guy. So I know that there's certain things that each of those types of people has to do, that certain use cases that virtualization can significantly improve your life. And that's what I'm going to talk about. And the last thing, like I was saying, I'm just kind of assuming everyone here has a basic understanding of Virt. I mean, I'm not talking about how it works, but what it is. Essentially boiled down being you can run an operating system as a process on top of your host machine. You've at least you've used VertManager, or you've seen it, or you've at least heard of it. That was interesting. Because I'm not going to step through how you create a virtual machine. Those things, if you just yum install VertManager and open it up, it should reasonably walk you through. I'm not going to say it's the most intuitive thing on the planet, but it should be pretty easy to figure out. So even if you are totally new to Virt, you might get something out of this, or you should get something out of this. But yeah, if you're totally new, yum install VertManager, go from there. Right, so like I said, what this talk is about, I kind of call it intermediate Virt tips for the previous audience. So this is not super entry-level stuff, and it's not too complex either. Most of what I try to focus on is things that I know specifically that when I started doing with Virt, they made my life a lot better. Things that some kind of new stuff that people might not have seen yet, some little tips that maybe people just haven't done. I don't know. It's basically stemmed from things that I knew helped me, and I assume it's going to help. Some of the tips are going to help some. The focus is generally the use of the VM as an OS, and what I mean by that is you have a virtual machine for Fedora 19. Say you're a packager, you have a virtual machine for Fedora 19, for Fedora 20, for Rawhide, and you are using that VM as a Fedora 19 box, Fedora 20. You're not maybe it's confusing, but because I'm a Virt developer, I use a lot of virtual machines just to test Virt, to make sure it starts and stops correctly. So maybe that doesn't really apply to other people, just kind of clarifying that most of these use cases are about, you're basically treating the VM as if it was a physical box and that was your Fedora 19 box, and when you need to test an update on Fedora 19, you would go to that box. Well, instead, we're just treating the VMs like that. Focus is QEMU, KVM, libvirt and VertManager. So KVM, Zen's in Fedora as well. Some of these things won't work with Zen because like I'm going to go over snapshots a lot. Zen does, I'm pretty sure Zen has support for snapshots, but it's not wired up in libvirt and VertManager. And not VirtualBox because it's not Fedora. And, you know, I know a lot of people use it and like it, but it's not Fedora. And I'm sure the kernel guys don't really, you know, they're not happy about the non-upstream drivers. libvirt, if you don't know what it is, it's just kind of this application layer that sits between various Virt, the hypervisors, and applications. If you don't know too much about it, it's okay. And VertManager for the UI, not strictly required for all these things, none of these things. It's strictly It's not strictly required for any of the things I'm going to talk about. It's all that you can do from the command line using Virsh, V-I-R-S-H. It's the command line interface to libvirt. There's other UI tools in Fedora, boxes, known boxes, for example. It's pretty slick. It's got a slightly different focus. VertManager is kind of just like a toolbox. Boxes is like a slick experience. Like I said, I'm going to be going over snapshots. A big section on snapshots. Boxes doesn't do snapshots yet, but it is in the works. And there's a couple other places I'll point out where you could do things with boxes, but the UI examples and demos I'm going to do myself. So, like I was saying before, not an introduction to Virt, I'm not going to go over it. And this is not deep technical details. I'll touch on the way things work in a couple places, but I'm not going to be talking about, you know, hardware Virt extensions or anything like that. All right, the goods. So we're going to start with snapshots, like I've been saying, or some people call them VM checkpoints. So, all right, let's get some notes here. Right. Right, okay, let me explain a bit how snapshots work and the history of them. At the QEMU level, snapshots have been there for a long time. And they've been wired up in libvirt for a long time, but actually the UI in VertManager, the VertManager UI, has only been there since Fedora 20 and on. So this is kind of newish, the UI. The way they work is, say you've got a running VM, and you're like, oh, I want to see what happens when I don't know, scribble a bunch of stuff into memory, or I don't know, you want to like do a yum update, you're not sure if it's going to kill your machine. You would take a snapshot, and what it does is it saves the disk state and the memory state of your VM into, with a little bit of metadata, into the disk image of your machine. And then you can name it and say, before update. You yum update, it kills your machine, you know, something bad goes on, or you're just saying, I want to undo that. You can select that snapshot, run it, and it will reload right into memory from disk. Your VM will just pick up right where it was when it left off. So it's pretty damn cool and it's pretty damn useful. Requires QCOW2. QCOW2, if you don't know, is like a disk image format that it's a QEMU thing. It's pretty cool. It adds features that you need because the snapshots are stored inside the disk image. QCOW2 has some metadata and like, you know, like I said, special features, so it handles this. VertManager on Fedora 20 and later, if you create a new VM, it will be using QCOW2 by default. But if you created a VM on any older version, you used a raw disk image. So you'll see if you try to go into the UI, try to do snapshots. It'll give you a little error. It can be a bit slow switching back and forth between them, or not instantaneous.
A couple questions.
Yeah.
If you have an older image, is it possible to convert?
Yes, you can. It's not easy in VertManager. You have to do it from the command line. I don't cover that, but if you Google, I'm sure if you Google like convert raw to QCOW2, it's simple.
Yeah.
You just have to restart libvirt to make sure that's what's up.
Does the UI get grayed out if you're not using QCOW2?
Yeah, there's a little button I'll show you.
Okay.
And yeah, there's a tooltip. If you roll over, it'll say, you know, I don't know exactly what it'll say, but it says something about this image.
Okay. Because the first thing I'll get confused about is I'll try to some other raw images in VertManager and then it just won't work.
Yeah, no, it's not going to fall over the little button that you get into the snapshot UI. It will be grayed out, and if you roll over it, have a tooltip. There's various other reasons. You could be connecting to like RHEL 6 where libvirt is too old. You know, it'll tell you as well that libvirt is too old. But yeah, like I was saying, they're a bit slow. You switch back and forth between them can be kind of slow, but they are very, very useful.
Can you talk more about what part of it is slow? Does it just take a while to do the snapshot, or
Creating a snapshot, deleting a snapshot, switching to it. I mean,
does it kill the VM's performance while you're doing that, or is it more just?
this is one of the things about the snapshots is that they're non-live, and the fact that when you're switching to a snapshot, the VM's paused. So for these kind of use cases, it's fine. For like a live server or something like that, you know, these are not really. Snapshots are a complicated topic because there's also live snapshots, but they're not as useful for this type of use case. They're more useful for because of various caveats. It's a very confusing topic. But in this case, yeah, if you're doing like a public server, you probably don't want to be using these. But if it's just targeting people, I'm saying with the use cases I'm talking about, then it really doesn't matter. And we're talking like 30 seconds max. And most of the time it's quicker. Because in fact, I mean, when you switch to a snapshot, it's got to read, potentially gigabytes of memory into, like, out of this disk image. Have QEMU essentially live migrate to it, and then, well, not live, but migrate to it, and revert all these copy on write, like switch the entire disk that you're pointing to and stuff like that. So it's actually that's about as fast as it'll ever be. Deleting and stuff like that. Deleting stuff like that. All right, so anyway, so on to the actual use cases. Reproducing bugs. So, let's see how easy it is to get this going. Yes.
Can you do a snapshot? Is that just duplication or is that disk space?
No, it's copy on write, so it doesn't completely duplicate the disk. It's as storage efficient as it effectively can be. Yeah, I mean, when you create a snapshot, disk-wise, it doesn't. It's not, I don't think it's copying any blocks right then, but as you go from there, it's going to be doing copy on write. So in fact, having snapshots actually having snapshots in the image can affect the performance of your VM going forward, because every time you write, you might have to be duplicating multiple blocks. I'm not like super up on the technical details.
You can go in and delete snapshots later, right?
Oh, yeah. Alright, so here's an example of something I've hit before. So VertManager, a lot of people use it on different desktops. I primarily develop on GNOME. So every now and then, probably every 6 months, we get a legitimate bug that comes in and someone's saying, oh, VertManager does something weird on KDE or XFCE or LXDE or whatever. So I only use GNOME. And if I have to go and reproduce this bug on my desktop, it sucks. I have to close all my applications, I have to log out, I have to go whatever, and every time these bugs, because they're usually slight behavior differences in window manager stuff, whatever, every single time it's that I go and try and reproduce it once and maybe I can't reproduce it, I gotta go back and ask the reporter, hey, how do you do this? And I don't want to sit there on this foreign desktop where I don't feel comfortable and I don't have any of my stuff, and I switch back to GNOME, and then an hour later the guy gets back to me and I gotta go back, and it's like total productivity killer. Doing something like this with snapshots is great. So actually, toolbar so I can show you. This is a little button, snapshot button. Manage VM snapshots, but if it's grayed out, you roll over it and it'll tell you, why. It should tell you why. Okay, so I already had pre-populated this XFCE snapshot. Okay, and one thing I want to say about this, I'm gonna try and find a way to improve this. When you revert to a snapshot, the previous contents of your disk are lost. So if you made a ton of changes, installed a bunch of packages, and you're like, oh, actually no, I want to switch my XFCE snapshot and reproduce this bug. Unless you create a new snapshot first and encode those changes you just made, they are lost. The snapshot becomes the current state of the disk. And we warn you about it here. It's still a little non-intuitive. I don't know, we might find some way to like work with it in VertManager where we automatically create snapshots as last state or something like that. But just so you know, change this last. So this is loading right now. Fortunately, we don't have any progress information. But as you can see, I just loaded a snapshot, and here I am sitting in XFCE, and I'm in my VertManager repo, and I can just git update, a git pull, and go from there. So if
I didn't realize this was so slick now.
Oh, it's super awesome.
Saved like my
yeah.
entire last weekend with this video.
Yeah, that's, where's my...
I spent like
oh,
the
there it
whole
is.
fucking Sunday reinstalling Fedora 20 15 times for some network manager bug.
Yeah, yeah. Well, good. It's already, this talk's already useful.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry, that didn't really help plans demo action.
Yeah, I've got like rel 510, 59, 58, 70,
Yeah,
71,
Because last time I looked at it,
20,
it was still,
21. No, yeah.
it was still wired up the way where you wound up with a bunch of crazy file names and you had to mess around with it manually to apply snapshots, and I was just like, fuck this. This is way better.
Yeah, and that's the thing, you were probably looking at live snapshots too. It's kind
Yeah, I
of, it's
think I
kind
may
of
have been,
confusing, you know?
Yeah.
Red Hat developers, because live snapshots are more enterprisey,
Yeah.
but they don't do the memory, and
Right.
managing them is a total pain. And there's real problems too, where it's like, it's just a management nightmare. These have been around forever and they're awesome. The people that know about them, like, you know, have known about them at the QEMU level, swear by them, have been begging libvirt to add support for years and years. And libvirt had support, and then we just never turned it on Virt Manager, because QEMU developers kind of like, they kind of said, those aren't supportable because it's not live. Doesn't matter, they're awesome. And they've made them more performant. They actually used to be worse, but it was just like small bugs because none of the real engineers, the real developers, like paying attention to it. Okay, so anyways, back to this. So for reproducing bugs, as you saw, that was the demo. Elaborating on this, anything that requires complex setup. So the XFC you can kind of call complex setup. I have to turn off my workflow, or some, you know, if there's a bug that's in some non-standard feature, you got to turn on all these things, you know, I don't know, storage features or something like that, or set up a cluster or what the heck ever. Doing it in a VM and not doing it on a physical machine, and being able to just like switch back and forth, and you know, hey, that's my cluster snapshot. Cool. Anything you want, you know, anything that might be potentially destructive is going to crash your machine. You know, and obviously not all bugs make sense to do in virtual machines. If you're a kernel developer working with specific hardware or a lot of kernel issues in general, VM isn't going to make sense. But for the rest of us, they're pretty cool. And yeah, like I said, a bug that requires back and forth debugging. If you let's say you hit an Anaconda bug on your host, you know, and you can reproduce it in a VM, and then you can just save it. Maybe you don't know what log files you need. You can just sit it there, reopen it up, where it's literally crashed, or a kernel issue or something like that. I haven't really used snapshots for like other people's bugs too much, but it's just an idea.
Question, so QCOW2 supports zlib compression for the sparse data in the image. Is there any discussion of making these snapshots smaller? Because I assume that if this goes into QCOW2, the snapshots are zlib compressed.
No, you can turn compression as an optional feature,
Okay.
so it's not by default. The snapshots.
I want them smaller. The problem I have with a lot of this stuff is that now I'm like beginning to exceed the total SSD disk space I have on my laptop, and I want it to all fit on the SSD so I can kind of stream them off quickly, and I have free processor cycles, but I need to reduce the space of them.
Yeah.
So I assume that is there a UI option to turn on the compression for all
No,
the?
you can do it in libvirt.
Okay.
But well, actually, you can do the encryption in libvirt because QCOW2 has built-in encryption as well.
I mean, encryption will get you some level of compression, but
Actually, I think the compression option is just when you create the image using if you manually create a QCOW2 image using the tool QEMU-IMG.
That's what you use for the conversion as well. And actually just
You
Right,
convert-
yeah,
you
it's,
can-
it's like the disk image
yeah.
like utility
Okay.
tool. It's pretty awesome. I think when you create it, compression is just an option, and then
if it's
QEMU
turned
handles
on,
it
will the
totally transparent.
snapshots then also
Yeah,
have
the whole
compression?
thing is compressed. So
Yeah, exactly.
the snapshots, the actual disk data is probably. I mean, I guess there would be deduplication or something. So, and I don't know how much memory is going to be compressible because a large chunk of the snapshot size is RAM state that it has to save. You know, so if you have like 2 gigs, like you know, for the VM's actually using 2 gigs of memory, it has to save all of that into the disk image. So,
That's fine, but if
yeah.
it gets compressed, then I'm happier.
Yeah. I don't know if you can do it with libvirt, but if you created a QCOW2 image behind libvirt's back, then point
You
it.
can modify the QCOW2 image behind libvirt's back, it's fine, right?
Yeah, I think that should be fine, because I'm pretty sure the compression is just totally transparent you don't need to tell QEMU on the command line use compression.
No, it
just
looks
reads
at,
out
looks
the
at the
header.
QCOW data, yeah.
But yeah, there's not too many people ask about that. I mean, the reality is most Vert stuff, it probably impacts performance quite a bit, but if you're in your specific use case, you know that
I need
makes sense.
disk space.
Right,
yeah.
right, right. Yeah, useful for bugs reported against your code and useful for bugs reported, basically.
It's also useful also if you're in an environment where you're paying for disk space as well.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. Right, okay, some other things that snapshots are useful for. Testing package updates, kind of like I said, you know, if you want to try an update. I already covered that, any infrastructure, really. And just really testing anything you want to easily undo.
Once again about the naming, you mentioned live snapshots and VM snapshots. How do you distinguish them in terms of naming them?
In terms of naming them, the live snapshots are not exposed to vert managers. Those are only the kind of internal ones. So,
Just when you're talking about them.
oh, when I'm talking about them, yeah. These ones are internal snapshots because all the data is stored in the QCOW2 file. Live snapshots are external snapshots because when you take a snapshot, it creates a separate disk image overlay file. But yeah, they don't have any coordination with memory content as well. You can kind of do it, but it's also a management. Like for Vert Manager, it would be in order of magnitude more difficult to support, and it would still have lots of caveats. Half the operations you do would have to. Well, I'll try to make some touch that. And yeah, if you're switching between multiple versions of software, right. So this is actually something I use, there's a Vert Manager as a test suite, and it runs against your system installed libvirt. And I often need to say, okay, I have upstream libvirt on my physical machine, and I run the test suite against that. But every now and then, before I cut a release, I want to make sure that the test suite doesn't have any baked-in assumptions and fail on an older version of libvirt. So I've got like a VM with a couple versions of libvirt installed in different snapshots. And I'll just SSH in, because I can do this all from the command line. You know, switch snapshot, SSH in, and then run the test suite against that. And it's really easy, rather than having to check out an old version of libvirt, recompile that, which takes like 5 minutes on my host. It's quicker to switch between snapshots. And yeah, like I was saying before, Boxes doesn't support snapshots right now, but I believe there's a Google Summer of Code student working on it. I've seen blog posts go by. I don't know what state it's in, but if you use Boxes or you're interested in Boxes, they're going to have snapshot support. Probably going to be slicker too, but the underlying stuff. Right, okay, so this is another thing. A lot of times, a different topic. So just getting command line access to your VM. A lot of times, for many tasks, graphical access is overkill, and interacting with like the graphical console of the VM, the spice of the VNC, which it can, it's not super intuitive. It grabs your mouse. You can't just like alt tab out of it. So yeah, like the test suite thing I was just describing. A lot of times you just need command line access to your VM. So there's really two ways you can do this: SSH, just like a physical server, or serial console. SSH access is a little weird though. So maybe this will work if the VM has a host name and you configure it. It's not just localhost, and you've got a VAHI set up, which I'm not. I know it's probably installed in the default desktop spin, but I'm not entirely sure if on Fedora 20 it's even like firewall open. But if you're on your host machine, I'm talking about going from your host to inside a VM running on your host. That might work. So the other thing, you want the VM IP address. This is hard. It's weird because you can't there should be proper support for it, like as an API in libvirt. You should just be able to say VM, tell me the IP. Doesn't really exist yet. Because you don't actually, like QEMU doesn't know the VM's IP address. You have to get it from inside the host, inside the VM. Only the VM operating system knows its IP address. So
there's an DNS know it? I mean, it's the thing that gave it out.
Yeah, maybe, but there's no interactive I don't know, there's no interactive like way to talk to DNS masks. Okay, so I'm gonna go over, there's things you can do, right?
Right.
But DNS mask only works for one networking option, it's not a general
Oh,
switch, you know? So, right, so maybe you can scrape the host ARP cache, because this does work for the default networking option if you use Virt Manager, is like, it turns your host machine into a NAT router for your VMs. It's called the default virtual network. Virtual network is this like NAT concept that we have. If you're using that, you can scrape the host ARP cache, and if you Google about it, if you Google like libvirt IP address or find the VM IP address, this is all off of a blog post by Rich Jones, this guy that did the guest of us. He's, you know, longtime Red Hat guy. Awesome, really cool, so shouts to him for all this stuff. But none of this is like really general, so it works for the default network, like I said, but it does not work generally, because if you're using Bridge, which requires some manual setup, but also gives your VM a real IP address on your host, on your host network, you know. And then you can, because there's some caveats with NAT too. You can talk to the VM, but there's no port forwarding similar to like NAT on an actual router, you know. And you can configure it with libvirt, but like it's not well known and it's a pain. There isn't UI for it. There probably should be. But if you're trying from another host, you know, if these are all connected to your desktop and you're on your laptop sitting on your couch, like, you know, getting to the VM behind the virtual network on your desktop doesn't work.
There was this guy who commented on a post of mine, and he was like, well, couldn't you just set up the port forwarding in Virt Manager and then set up the port forwarding from your router and send it through? And I'm like, well, you could, but you could just use a bridge. That seems a hell of a lot simpler.
But, right, so yeah, I'm still, right, so I'm just doing it. Okay, so this giant, ugly command, this will talk to, there's a piece of software that is usually running inside the VM. If you install Fedora 20 and you install a desktop, you've got the QEMU guest agent running inside. And if you created the VM on Fedora 20 Virt Manager, you'll get the proper host setup. And you can run this command, and it will actually, the guest agent it can't run arbitrary stuff. It has a defined set of commands that you can do inside of this. So it has this command, guest network get interfaces, and it's going to print some JSON output. I'll demonstrate it.
What's the RHEL support for the QEMU guest agent? 'Cause
it's definitely there in RHEL 6 and RHEL 7, but the RHEL 6 integration probably isn't good. The RHEL
yeah,
7,
and I was about to say for RHEL 6, I pretty much basically have to CLI, log in as root, and then do an ifconfig to get the address of that thing and then connect to it.
Yeah, and the thing is, that stupid command, that's not the way it's going to always be. In fact, I knew that there was a way, but until I was doing my research for this talk, I didn't know that it was actually there. I thought it was patches that hadn't been applied upstream. So that thing eventually is going to be turned into a native libvirt API, which is going to mean we're going to be able to just show the IP address in Virt Manager UI. So there were patches posted for libvirt. Like last year, and then dude just didn't follow up.
I can type out.
Sufo. You guys don't use that command? Wait, Q. Do I not have this? Oh, there. Okay, so that's actually running, it gives you this obviously nasty output. I mean, you could probably find a way. The Python JSON tool is just to give you like some pretty printed output there. But see, it'll show you my Fedora 20 VM, which is running, and gets its actual IP address. So that's, you know, it's a little crazy, but that is like the kind of proper way. No matter what host networking you're using, that's going to give you the IP address of the Cs.
Where can I see an overview of all the available commands? Is that the commands that it's
The QEMU guest agent? I think you just Google it. The reality is that kind of verse, that verse thing is actually kind of like a hack. That verse thing doing the QEMU agent command is kind of a hack. You're not really expected. supposed to do that. I shouldn't say supposed to, but you're not really expected to do that. The idea is that every piece of information that's useful that the QEMU agent can provide should be exposed as a proper libvirt API. So there should be a top-level command that just says virsh domain IP list or something like that, you know? And it's going to give you better, pretty printed output. It's not going to give you all that information. It's just going to be the crap to care about. So there was, like I said, there was work to do that, and then it just kind of stalled. But once that exists, we'll do it in VertManager. We'll do it in VertManager. But like for example, VertManager doesn't use like the equivalent of this command. We never want to bypass libvirt to talk to QEMU directly, because you can use this QEMU agent command to do like crazy stuff inside your VM. This is really kind of like, in fact, now I'm kind of regretting putting it on here, but, you know, because this is not recommended. This is a stopgap, but I'm just here to say, hopefully by Fedora 21, we'll just have a stupid thing, a little piece of UI in VertManager when you click on the NIC hardware info that just says IP address, boom. Yeah, and even this is not always going to work. If you fire up Fedora 18, it's not going to have the QEMU guest agent because it wasn't really pulled in by default. And even if you install a minimal VM, it's not going to have, like a minimal install in Anaconda, it's not going to have the QEMU guest agent just because of the way comps is set up, because they want it to be super, super minimal. But if you install any desktop environment, like, you know, group install, KDE, Plasma, whatever, it's going to pull it in because it's in that base desktop group. And unfortunately, like Fedora 19 VertManager doesn't set up the host side communication channel for the QEMU guest agent. You can add it if you go add hardware, channel, whatever, but you know, this is only going to just work if you create the VM on Fedora 20. It is fairly cheap. And like I said, first class support coming. Right, okay, so the other thing I was saying, the other way to get command line access to your VM is serial console. And what this is essentially the equivalent of, oh, you've got a serial port on your machine, and then you're wiring up like a USB serial something or other, and you're checking kernel crashes and everything. Thing is, on virtualization, it's easier. We just attach an emulated serial card in your VM, we hook it up to a host side piece, and there's actually some nice integration, like VertManager has it, etc. But the problem is this doesn't work out of the box either. But it doesn't work out of the box because of the VM. The VM is by default not outputting stuff to your serial console. If you're connected to the console in your terminal on their host side, the formatting can be a bit funky compared to SSH just because of the way it works. It's not really anyone's fault. It's just how it goes. So there's a thing called VertIO that made this easy. And I've got notes here that say RAM. You used to be able to just attach a VertIO device to your VM, and systemd saw this and did some magic and automatically set up a login prompt. So the way, I'll show it on the next slide, the way you interact with this on the host side is you just start your VM and then just type ReverseConsole VM name, and boom, you've got like a login prompt right there, which is sweet. VertManager is setting this up by default, but this all depended apparently on the fact that VertIO was compiled into the kernels on a kernel module. They changed that in order to make the kernel smaller, and now systemd doesn't work with it anymore, because it just assumes the thing is there and it doesn't really want to mess with udev for detecting serial consoles that really boot up, so it's kind of an impasse where I'm like, please just turn it back on, but people were saying, no, it should be in the kernel, which is true, and systemd is saying, no, I don't want to deal with udev in this case, it should just be trivial there, which is also true, and so yeah. The problem is right now this doesn't work automatically anymore, and VertManager is still setting the wrong default, so I need to fix that. But systemd does have a little bit of magic, where if you put console equals TTYS0 on the kernel boot command line, systemd sees this and says, you want output to go to serial, therefore, I'll send the output to serial, but I'll also start a login prompt there. So basically, what this ridiculous thing is, if you pointed at you see it says like start, cache VM. If you just put a VM's name there, the VM's got to be shut off, it'll warn you about it. This will go inside the VM, tell grub to use TTYS0, and update the grub config. And then if you can start a VM and say reverse start VM, and if you give it this -- console, it'll immediately drop you right into that. So when you do this, you'll start seeing the boot output scroll by, and then when that's done, it'll drop you right into a logging prompt. So if you've got a shut off VM and you don't care about graphical anything, you can just do this, boom, and it's just going to drop you into the logging. You know, it's how long it takes to boot the VM, 5-10 seconds. For an already running VM, you can do VertConsole. It does the same thing, drops you into the console. A lot of times it'll drop you and you'll see no output. You got to hit enter for it to actually refresh the prompt, which is just how it is. And this little extra bit here, VertXML, blah blah blah. Use serial. That'll basically also tell the VM to use SGA BIOS, which is a little bit that says send BIOS output to the serial, and you'll see like the boot menu, and you'll see the grub menu as well pop up. So you basically have a fully 100% headless VM. VertXML is just a little tool to programmatically change the host side VM configuration. So yeah, I'll just do a quick little demo of.
What's the actual benefit of this? Is it massively more efficient, or is it just kind of a cool hack?
It's just, like I said, if you just need command line access to a
Right.
VM, this is way quicker than going through the graphical console. So yeah, it's a hack. It's not there's anything obvious, but like, I mean, I most of the time, I don't want to deal with starting a Vert Manager or starting VM and then having VertBuilder running and then having to close that, whatever. I just want to go blah, 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 test some crap, whatever. So, I mean, so much of what we do is on the command line. If you just need command line access, it's the equivalent of, you know, close equivalent of doing SSHO, you know. You're not connecting to VNC to your remote server all the time, you know. You just want to get in. Stop. So this is pre-configured. I'm obviously not doing that crazy grub command because I already did it. So yeah, nothing fancy, but it's pretty sweet that it works. And as you can actually see, the graphical console back there too. It sends out to the graphical console, so it's not.
What's the escape command there? Control C. How do you get it
It's control.
Yeah, because you're
bracket. But actually, when you connect to VertConsole, the way it did there, you didn't see it.
Yeah.
But if you do VertConsole VM, it actually gives you a little banner that says this is how you exit. It's like
Okay.
hang up like the.
Yeah, the escape sequence. Yeah.
Yeah. If you do VertStart console, it flies by, you don't see it. Yeah.
All right.
No, just a remark or question.
Yes.
I had some troubles with this. There is some like support for serial console even in Virt Manager in GUI. Like there is this switch,
Yeah.
and I guess well some of that worked for me only under root and not under a regular user. I
This is
think
a long time ago, or
maybe it was maybe
yeah. Now
a year back or two.
It used to not. And like if you're using RHEL 6 or something like that, I don't know if the support's there or whatever. But yeah, it used to not because it tried to directly connect to. It essentially sets up a pseudo TTY on the host. It used to try and directly connect, but now it uses its fancy libvirt guys to stream it all. But yeah, that should work. There is Vert Manager if you go to View, whatever. And if you got a headless VM too, like Vert Manager, that has no graphic card attached.
And I think the second problem was that I could not like combine those two consoles. If I started one of them, the second one stopped working.
That's kind of like an unavoidable problem because essentially it's just kind of like a FIFO. Like the data is just sent to the host thing, and the first guy that reads it, that consumes it, it's no longer there to be read. So there's probably some way you could work around it, but it would be like some, you know, not work around it. It would probably take some serious development, like at the libvirt layer, to provide some abstraction to work around it. But yeah, you can only have one console connected.
Okay.
It's the same, I mean, it's kind of the same with serial console. It's kind of imagine like two things looking at it. If you had a physical serial console, it'd be like splitting the cable, you know? That is only going to go one place.
Okay.
But I know that is confusing. Okay, so if you look back here, I use this Vert customize command. So I'm going to elaborate on this a little bit. If you guys haven't heard of libguestfs, it's like a library of things that allows you to do crazy stuff with accessing VMs.
One more question regarding the
Yeah, sure.
console. Will it work also on other archives like Power or x86, or is it something specific for x86 virtual machines? Or what support does it require?
Well, it requires a grub. So if they use grub
Yeah.
PC.
For setting the console parameter, but
Yeah,
generally it
I
should work.
think it should work, yeah.
Okay.
I mean, I know, for example, ARM doesn't have a grub. So the specific, but if you're talking about just the kernel parameter, ARM uses a different kernel parameter, or it's not different kernel
Yeah,
parameter,
so
but a different
just
device.
setting the parameter in the kernel command line, and
I believe
the
that they're all
console
use
should-
systemd, and systemd is smart enough, I believe, to
Yeah.
see that and say, hey, start up a login, I think, I'm pretty sure. I mean, if you create, I'm gonna touch on ARM VMs as well. Well, kind of running out of time. Yeah, ARM VMs are all headless for now. Right, so Vert Customize, this is a libguessifs tool, and what you can actually do is just point it at a VM, and it's gonna run a command inside the VM, and it actually doesn't start up the VM and connect inside. It just takes a disk image, attaches it to a small VM appliance, and then cheroots into it and runs the command. So this is pretty sweet for just doing programmatic commands in your VMs from your host. VM needs to be shut off because it is accessing the disk contents. It can't be like two people scrubbing to it at the same time. So I did -- run command, it's just a generic thing. Another thing I like, which I like kind of run on a cron job, is for customized -- update, which just has a little bit of thing where libguessifs detects many variants of Linux distributions. So -- update is just a generic hey, do the equivalent of yum update for my VM OS. So granted, all my VMs are, for the most part, Fedora based. I've got Debian VMs, so I don't update them. I don't need to update them on a regular basis. So I could have just done run command yum update, etc. But it's kind of neat if you have like a heterogeneous, array of VMs of different Linux distros. And this one,
The output of the command is like printed out to the console or redirected?
yeah, I think actually it doesn't show the output unless the command fails, but it will give you a bunch of progress output.
And what if it is interactive, like if it asks for confirmation or?
I don't think it pipes through STID.
Okay.
So, I'm pretty sure it doesn't, so yeah, it couldn't be interactive.
Okay.
This last one here for changing the root password. I mean, this is kind of useful for like cloud images. So if you download the Fedora cloud image, it wants to, it by default has the root count locked, I believe. And what it wants to do is see a cloud init disk attached to it, blah, blah, blah. Doing it by, it's not really meant to be run by hand, but it can still be useful to run by hand. You can use this command to just change the root password or whatever you want. Obviously, actually passing the password on the command line is not secure because it's going to be in your, your bash history or whatever. So don't use any password you care about in that specific case. I think there is a way to get it to prompt for a password. But yeah, like I said, thanks for testing cloud images. Alright, I guess I am running out of time, so I'll try and press this. Right, okay, so there's this tool VertBuilder as well, which is pretty awesome. VertBuilder downloads a minimal pre-composed Linux operating system image for virtual machines, right? They're cryptographically signed and they're hosted at libguessifs.org. You can just do VertBuilder Fedora 20 and it's going to download a Fedora 20, a minimal disk image. But VertBuilder has all these commands where you can, all these command lines where you can pass it. I want to set the root password disk. I want you to also install these packages, etc., etc., etc. So if you want to provision a VM super fast, the disk image really, you then need to go into VertManager. Okay? You then need to go into VertManager and create a VM around the disk image.
It was doing that all last night as well.
There's
That's strange. This is the only reason.
ghosts.
Yes.
Yeah, you'd have to go in, create a new VM, say import this disk image, etc., etc. But it's pretty awesome, especially because it's got CentOS there, it's got Debian images there, and they're adding like Arch images as well. So if you don't care about going through Anaconda, you just want a Fedora 20 VM to just play with real quick, and you don't have one set up on your laptop or whatever. This is really quick because it's only downloading 200, 300 megs. Granted, then you're gonna have to yum update it and actually install the packages you want. But
How much of that initial disk image is glibc localization?
no, I don't know. I don't know exactly how Rich composes them, because this is all.
Probably 150 megs of that installed is like every language we possibly support, and that's my fault, and I'm sorry.
Yeah, well, I'm sure it's only as minimal as like the cloud images, minimal the Fedora.
Yeah, they are also 110
Yeah.
megs of localization data, and I'm sorry.
But if you do VertBuilder -s list, you'll see all the actual the distros that are available. Just download and create a disk image out. Yep.
Where do you find it? VertBuilder?
Oh, I think it's like libguestfs-tools-c, but if you just do yum install user bin VertBuilder, you'll find it.
Is it downloading QCAT2 images that have been assigned?
I believe, yeah, they're QCAT too.
Hopefully with compression turned on.
No, I don't think, like, compression is one of those things that most people don't know about. I don't hear about people. Maybe people use it because, like I said, I'm pretty sure it's transparent. The tools don't need to know anything about it, except when you create the image, it's just a flag. But yeah, I'm not really sure. Yeah, and then you can import it. Yeah, run Fedora ARM images too. So if you're a packager and you've got your package and you try to kick it off on Fedora 21, to build off on Fedora 21, and fails to build on ARM, and you want to consider trying to fix that yourself, or maybe you're an upstream developer or whatever, and someone gives you an ARM build failure. Doing it in a VM on your x86 host is pretty decent if you don't have any ARM hardware. It's really slow, but it's doable. I mean, yeah, if you're trying to debug like a LibreOffice build failure, it would probably be extremely, extremely painful. But if you've just got some, comparatively small-ish package, I'm not going to go over the steps to actually create an ARM VM because it's not like impossible or anything like that. But it's a little non-trivial. But the wiki page there, if you just Google Fedora 20 ARM QEMU. That's going to be the thing that pops up, and there's instructions there. And actually, you don't even really need to install. It's mostly just about pulling down the Fedora ARM images, the Fedora ARM disk image. You have to pull up the kernel and initRD, which I probably need to update the wiki because actually there's a libguestfs tool that makes that really, really trivial. And then just got to do a little bit of special funky incantation in Vert Manager. And if anyone was at the ARM talks, you should be able to do AR64, ARM64 emulation on Fedora 21. It does work now, I just got to figure out the proper incantation. People probably don't care about that yet, but they will be soon because, hey, Fedora 22 might be, AR64 might be primary architecture, who knows.
So if you just download a QCal2 image for ARM from a website, stick that in the tool and just go. That easy, or do you have to?
It is. There's a little, just a couple extra steps, but yeah, that's basically it. Just because it's kicking off an ARM VM, it's not standard. They don't have like a BIOS that can just read it in the disk images. You need to pull the kernel and initRD out of the VM. It's pretty crappy, and we're trying to take upstream big steps. It's like a much bigger problem to just make it kind of work like x86 does in that respect. But all it is just you gotta do that. You gotta put this thing here, you gotta put that thing here, and then boots. There's not like you're not recompiling U-boot or anything like that. It's very simple. It's just a couple extra steps that we just really can't automate. Okay, last thing. This is kind of silly, but this is just something I was very lax about for a long time. It really helped me. Like, keep your VMs well defined. It's kind of like a server. If you have this is my Fedora 20 box. Don't have it be your Fedora 20 box that you also happen to compile the upstream kernel and stick it in there or whatever. Keep them well defined. If you're, like I said, I'm still targeting people that are using this specifically to support multiple versions of Fedora, packaging, developing multiple versions of Fedora, etc. Keep your VM well defined. Use VM titles, use VM descriptions. This will probably be the last thing I'll show in a minute. And then, I just want to say, okay, there's that slide there.
So that doesn't list anything for me, despite the fact that I've got 7 VMs set up.
Yeah, so I'll explain that in a second. The reason is because you have to build a title field,
But I named them all really descriptive names.
Yeah, so I'll elaborate once I get my mouse to do something useful. Right, okay. So when you create a VM, and this is something we're probably going to fix. Boxes is smarter about this. When you create a VM, you have to give it a name. But the name is like the identifier for libvirt, And because of that, there's various rules about the name. You know, there's like certain characters it's going to reject. It can't do, well, it can do spaces. But the problem is that if you then want to do start VM, you've got to like escape the space in the VM's name. So you want the VM name to be pretty simple in case you're ever going to go to the command lines. However, you want also the option to have like a freeform, you know, title. If you want to describe it and give it a title that's, you know, freakishly long or whatever. If you go over here into the details page, this is like some metadata. So you can see, actually, I already have a description there, and this is what I do on my own host. Fedora 20 guests to be used for Fedora 20 purposes. It's a reminder to myself because I'm terrible at this. But yeah, if you just give it a title, it's like blah, 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 blah. And then let's go back to, yeah, if you come over back here, it'll now show you the title here. So if you want some massive freeform title, it's telling you stuff. And if you notice that when I hover over it, it's going to show the description as well. So if you're just like, what the crap is this VM for?
But then you don't see the name.
Yeah, the name.
Right, you don't see the name, but if you go to verse list, it'll
Well, that's the point. If you have it saying called one thing here and another thing in verse list, you're maybe going to get confused.
Yeah, well, that's why I had the verse list title. In fact, because I believe verse list title shows you.
Oh, okay.
So
Can
yeah,
you use the title and the name interchangeably in the verse commands?
No, I don't think so.
Oh.
Yeah, so maybe yeah, you guys are exposing.
So, I will say this again was non-obvious to me, and I just have really complicated VM names that are
Right.
like rel 65 2013
Oh, yeah, and then you first see
11.0
version,
dash
you're
server
like,
dash x86
And obviously that works. Then you go to the command line, you gotta
Right,
type all that
yeah,
crap
yeah.
out. There should be bash completion, and I believe someone has had kind of worked on it.
I don't care about that because I mean you just have scripts that pipe in the name, but I know what you mean about escaping. None of them have spaces, and I don't. I keep it.
Yeah, so I mean, I guess. But yeah, I know what you're saying, right? It's then you lose context. I mean, I guess you could do the title,
But
and
see, I
then in
don't-
parentheses at the end, put the name of the VM.
Yeah, that's what I was
Yeah, I guess. I mean, because then you could give it really trivial names.
Right.
Boxes will just like call it, you know, they'll be like Fedora space 20, and they'll give it a nice name, and then on the command line they'll put like a dash in it or something like that, and they only ever show you the title.
Yeah.
But you know, because they're trying to be super user friendly, they don't ever expect or really want their users to have to go to the command line to
Right.
push anything.
But
Virtual kind of
manager
exists
is
in this intermediate ether where we're trying to be.
Yeah, Vert Manager is kind of a
Yeah, it's like
tool. You do have to drop down sometimes.
So, all right, go that bad over time. I mean, there's no talk coming up after this, so anyone has any questions about talk or general Vert questions on the guy? And that's the Fedora Vert, just like questions. Let's pretty much answer everything on that.
Can you please fix the goddamn bug with the network, with the nested?
Yeah, it's on my radar.
It
Well,
happens, I don't know why it is, but it happens nearly every boot net 21. Every goddamn live boot I have to take down.
Yeah, you know, there was.
It used to be really
There was like
bad.
another issue, another networking issue that I think might just be tickling it in some
Right.
capacity. That actually could be fixed and then it'll mostly go away again. But
Yeah.
the fundamental problem still remains.
It's still
I
there,
know.
yeah.
I sent a mail to upstream mover list because I've been crazy busy, especially leading up to this conference. Like I didn't have time to really think about it.
Sure.
And I was just like, hey, can someone like come up with some novel idea about this, or maybe implement one of the crazy ideas you have in the bug? Radio silence, unfortunately, so I'm gonna have to go with, yell at someone.
I mean, maybe tell them it's like actually important because it's
Yeah,
gonna block
yeah,
releases.
yeah,
It blocks out in 5 years. It's gonna block rally. You know, it's like,
I mean, there's crazy hackish ways we could work around it too.
Right.
You know, if it comes down to it, that should be fairly simple.
Yeah.
I think he's talking about is that if you install libvirt inside a VM, so if your virtual machine is using the default virtual network on your host, it gets 192.168.122. Some address. If you then install libvirt inside that virtual machine, it tries to set up its own virtual network that is hard-coded, which is a mistake to begin with, 192.168.122, blah. When you restart the VM, it's booting up. The virtual network comes up before your host network, and it grabs that route. So your VM has no, it cannot use its IP address because 192.168.122 has been stolen by libvirt inside the VM.
Yeah.
So yeah, this is bad. Your
And the
VMs
problem
by
is that-
default don't have networking, and like
The problem
the GNOME
is that
desktop pulls in.
boxes.
Yeah,
it
pulls in boxes.
libvirt, so you get this
So
every
the
time you
live
do
CD
the
right
workstation
now,
image.
and this always technically existed, but didn't really
Yeah.
hit.
Well, once we reported it, and then we said, oh, we'll just take boxes out and fix it that way. That was how we fixed it for one release. So, yeah.
So I have to run verse list all title under sudo to get the full list. When I just run it under my user, it doesn't list anything. What have I done wrong with my configuration in that?
That's not you. This is a really confusing aspect of the way things work, of the way libvirt works, and I definitely have like half a blog post queued up about it.
But it's just a Fedora integration issue?
No,
when I launched Virt Manager,
it's not a bug.
when I
It's
launched
entirely intended, right? So
Okay.
this is the thing. libvirt is start as root. It's a root service, right?
Yeah.
But it can also be started as your regular user.
Okay.
So that's what Boxes uses. And I didn't really mention it, but Boxes is useful, but they have this crazy networking mode, and it's not their choice. It's that when you're running libvirt, when you're launching your VMs as a regular user, as an unprivileged user, you can't do this natted network thing, because you need to create tap devices on the host, which require root, and IP tables rules and stuff like that. So Virt Manager connects to the system libvirt because you get a proper networking mode. However, that causes all sorts of problems, because then like your VM is launching these. It's like we used to have this problem. It's kind of worked out now, but Virt Manager's got to jump through groups just so that you can use an ISO in your home directory with a VM that's running as root. I mean, sure, root can access anything, but actually the VM isn't running as root. It's launched as root with an unprivileged user. So this is another unprivileged user. It's got access to root resources because libvirt is running as root. But this other unprivileged user, the QEMU user, can't access your home directory, right? So we need to use ACLs to give it. It's strange too, because we need to give it execute permission so that it can find the file. libvirt changes the owner of the file so that it's crazy, right? For desktop integration issues, it sucks. You would think the way, like, I believe VirtualBox does this, oh, I'm running this as a user. The VMs are private to me. They're not system-wide. They're stored in my home directory. And it solves all sorts of permission problems like this, right? But then you can't do root privileged networking. VirtualBox finds a way through one of its crazy drivers or something like that. I don't know exactly how it works. It finds a way, but it's essentially you would have to give a regular user
access to network
right
configuration.
to things that it could then use to like snoop on other VMs or other. It has to in some way have privileged access. You could probably add like a very special network manager API, which I was really hoping when Boxes started up that they were going to essentially lean on network manager. It's all developed by part of the GNOME team. That they were going to provide some way that you could go in network manager and say, share this interface with my virtual machines, Because then Virt Manager could consider switching to this user thing, because it's just kind of the more desktop-y way.
Isn't there that other bridging method which I looked at briefly, and I can't quite think of the name, where you can basically share a host interface to a system in a method which isn't bridging and isn't
Mac VTAP.
That's the
But
one.
it's got weird caveats too, man. Everything has
Yeah, it has
caveats, and the main caveat is that the host can't talk to the
Right,
VM.
exactly, which doesn't bother you that much in a lot of places.
Well, if you're here, I mean, yeah, sure. But if you want to SSH into the VM or something like that, or SCP files out, they can't talk.
Yeah.
And so it's everything. Everything is caveats. There's so few like obvious best choices, and someone could probably invent one, but it's like for server use cases, people just use bridges. That's all they care about, and it just works. It'll be nice when we can say bridge interface, and it just works.
If you want to sit down and let me show you all the bugs in it, then
Well, I'm probably not going to be fixing those, but believe me, it's on my short list to go through and comprehend everything. Adam just did this massive series of going and playing with network manager. Supposed to be able to say, okay, bridge this interface nowadays, and libvirt kind of had a concept of that for a while, and they play weird, and the network manager UI is still a little funny. Whatever, I don't know. He did this. He did the thing I've been wanting to do for a long time to figure out all the crap, and now I just need to go and figure out what the hell he wrote. And hopefully we can get some bug fixed. People are looking at it, so I don't know. Is that useful? People learn some stuff?
Really good.
Cool.
Yeah.
Really good. Thank you.
Yep. Yeah.
Again,
Lunchtime.
secondary. Yes, I want to be able to run PPC64 and S390X VMs locally.
Oh, we will find some way.
I know. I mean, I can run them, but it's painful to get. Like, if I could say to someone else, here, there's an easy way to do it. Otherwise, I have scripts that have to run the system QEMU with everything pulled out.
I think it would be an option.